Ethan Morgan worked quietly inside the grand building of Hillcrest Conservatory. Every afternoon when the students left and the lights dimmed, he picked up his broom and mop and began his slow walk through the long marble halls. The building smelled of polish and perfume, filled with echoes of music that seemed to float in the air long after the last piano key was touched. Ethan was the janitor, invisible to those who studied there. He did his job well, but spoke little. He liked the sound of the piano more than any other instrument. It was gentle, like rain, and strong, like the ocean. Sometimes he paused in the corner of the rehearsal rooms as he swept, letting the sounds wash over him. The students practiced complicated melodies that made him both happy and sad. He could never afford lessons, yet the piano had always been part of his dreams. Ethan lived a simple life. He rented a small room in an old building on the edge of town and took the bus every morning to the conservatory. He had finished high school but never gone further. Work came early after his father passed away, and he had spent years doing small jobs to survive. Despite that, music never left him. He often hummed tunes while working, and in quiet hours he made small notes on bits of paper with chords and rhythms no one else saw. That night, the halls were shining from fresh cleaning. The echo of a grand piano from a distant room faded away as a student finished practicing. When the door closed and silence filled the air, Ethan moved into Studio 3 with his mop and bucket. This room was different. It had thick curtains, golden lamps, and a grand black piano that stood like a proud animal in the center of the polished floor. The stand on the piano showed an engraved nameplate that said Charlotte Whitmore. Everyone at Hillcrest knew her. She was the talented only child of a wealthy family. The teachers spoke about her as the most gifted student in years. Ethan had never seen her up close. He had seen her pass through the hall in fine coats and shining shoes, her face calm and certain. She looked like someone from a world where everything was easy. He swept near the window and looked at the piano again. Its surface reflected the warm lights, smooth and perfect. He told himself not to look for too long. He had no right to even stand near that piano. But something inside him stirred each night he came to that room. The piano called to him in a way words could not explain. He finished cleaning the corners and turned to leave. Then his broom slipped and its handle struck one of the piano keys. A single note filled the room, soft but clear, floating through the air like a whisper. Ethan froze. The sound lingered in his chest, pulling him closer. He looked around. The hallway was empty. The guards outside were likely taking their short smoke breaks. He hesitated for a long moment, then slowly stretched out his hand. His heart beat faster. He sat on the bench, careful not to leave marks. When his fingers met the keys, they trembled. He pressed one, then another. The sound was warmer than he remembered. He began to play a tune he had made years before, a lonely and gentle piece he used to hum while working at a factory. The melody filled the quiet room. It was a tune about loss and hope, about reaching for something far away. His fingers moved awkwardly at first, then flowed with growing courage. The music rose like breath and fell like a sigh. Unknown to him, Charlotte Whitmore had returned to the building to pick up her forgotten notebook. She walked lightly down the hall and paused beside the open door of Studio 3. The sight before her froze her in place. A man in a gray janitor uniform sat at her piano. His head bent low, his fingers shaping notes with strange honesty. The tune had rough edges but deep emotion. Charlotte had never heard anyone play that way inside the school. She could have shouted. She could have called security or the director. Instead, she stayed still, feeling something stir that she did not understand. The music was not polished, yet it felt real. She watched as Ethan's face softened when he played, the corners of his mouth turning quietly upward with each chord. After a few minutes, he stopped and looked around with wide eyes, as though waking from a dream. He realized what he had done. He stood quickly, closed the piano lid with care, and grabbed his broom. Charlotte stepped back into the shadows before he saw her. He left, walking down the hall toward the supply room. Charlotte entered the studio and stared at the piano. The air still carried the echo of the tune. She touched the keys lightly, trying to remember the melody. Her heart raced, not from anger but from curiosity. She whispered to herself, wondering who the man was. For the first time that year, she felt the silence after the music more strongly than the music itself. It was the night when two worlds that should never have met began to change. The next morning, the halls of Hillcrest Conservatory were full of whispers. Someone had played Charlotte Whitmore's piano after hours. No one knew who it was, but everyone had an opinion. Some teachers blamed a student. Others said a stranger had sneaked inside. The guards were questioned and the staff looked worried. Charlotte listened quietly while people talked, her face calm as always. She did not tell anyone what she had seen. Inside her mind, the notes from the night before still played like a secret tune that would not stop. During her lessons that day, she could not concentrate. Each time her teacher asked her to repeat a passage, her hands hesitated. She was hearing that other melody underneath every sound she made, and her teacher asked if something was wrong. She said she was tired and needed rest. In truth, she just wanted to hear the janitor play again. When evening came, Ethan returned to work. His heart felt heavier than usual because he feared he had done something wrong. He had been careful not to leave fingerprints, but what if someone had seen him? He swept the same floors as always, trying to push the memory away. Yet each time he passed Studio 3, he felt his steps slow down. He told himself he would never touch that piano again. Then he remembered the soft feel of the keys and the sound that had filled the room, and the promise faded. Charlotte waited until most people had gone home. She told the guard she had more practice to finish and went into Studio 3 again. She placed her notebook on the bench and pretended to play a few scales, leaving the door half open. She did not know if he would come, but part of her hoped he would. Ethan came down the hall carrying a trash bag and his mop. He stopped when he heard the sound of the same piano he had played before. His chest tightened. He did not think she would be there so late, quietly stepped inside, and began emptying the bins. Charlotte glanced up without stopping her hands. "You are the janitor, right?" she said in an even voice. Ethan nodded, unsure whether to speak. "You played here last night," she said. He looked down, his face pale. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I did not mean to touch your piano. I just wanted to hear how it sounded." She studied him for a moment, waiting. "It played very well," she said at last. He looked surprised. "Not really, I was just trying an old tune I made up." Charlotte closed the piano and stood beside it. "Where did you learn to play?" she asked. Ethan gave a small shrug. "From an old neighbor who had no money either. Taught me on a broken keyboard when I was 15. After he moved away, I tried to keep practicing, but life kept me busy. I never had lessons." She looked at him differently now, seeing not the uniform but a quiet strength. "That was your own melody?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Just something I wrote a long time ago." Charlotte crossed her arms, thinking, it had something most music here lacks. It felt honest. Most of us play to impress others. You played like the music mattered more than the person. He smiled a little at that, though he looked unsure. "If I were you, I would not want a janitor touching your piano again," he said. Charlotte shook her head. "Maybe next time you will play while I am still here. I want to hear it again." Her tone made it sound like a challenge more than an invitation. Then she picked up her notebook and left the room. The next evening, Ethan arrived an hour later than usual. He had planned not to show himself, but the memory of her words kept returning. He waited until the building was almost empty and walked toward Studio 3. The door was open. Charlotte sat at the piano, her back straight, fingers running over a few notes. She looked up when he entered. "You are late," she said with a small smile. Ethan set his broom against the wall and stepped closer. "I was finishing another room," he said quietly. She moved aside on the bench. "Sit." He hesitated, then sat down. They looked at the keys, side by side, not speaking. She started a soft tune, leaving small spaces as if inviting him to join in. He waited for several bars before adding small notes of his own. The sound grew richer, their music mixing like two voices learning to speak together. For a while they forgot who they were. The air filled with warm light and sound. When the music stopped, Charlotte turned to him and said, "There is something special in the way you play. It feels real." Ethan looked down. "Maybe because I have nothing to lose." She smiled faintly. "Then play again tomorrow." He nodded, though he knew how impossible it seemed. As she left the room, Ethan watched her walk through the door, her long hair catching the light from the corridor. He knew she was from a different world, yet for those few minutes they had shared one. He returned to cleaning the floor, but his mind was no longer on his work. A new tune formed inside him, one that blended her sound and his own until they became one melody. Every night after that evening, Charlotte and Ethan met again in Studio 3. At first they acted formal, speaking only about the music, but slowly the walls between them began to fall. Charlotte brought her notebooks filled with half-finished ideas. Ethan brought his paper scraps covered with notes written in pencil. Together they joined small bits of each tune until they found something strong that belonged to both of them. Charlotte liked to play pieces that followed clear patterns. Every beat had a rule. Every note had a reason. Ethan played by feeling, sometimes missed a chord or added strange pauses, yet his music had life. When they played together, her order shaped his chaos, and his freedom gave her music breath. The sound that filled the room was unlike anything that had been played in the conservatory. At first, she worried someone might see them. She made Ethan promise to meet only after the last lights were off. He agreed, grateful even for 1 hour of music. The hours they spent in that small room felt larger than any dream. They laughed quietly whenever they hit wrong notes, teasing each other like old friends. Charlotte learned to listen without judging. Ethan learned to trust the sound of his own hands again. One night, while the rain tapped against the high windows, she asked about his life. He told her about the town where he grew up, about his father who worked in a garage, and his mother who sang at church. He said they had no money for instruments, but an old neighbor taught him a few songs because he said the boy had music in his bones. When that neighbor moved away, Ethan taught himself by listening carefully to radio tunes. Charlotte told him about her lessons since childhood, about being pushed to win prizes and earn respect for her family name. I'd always done what others wanted, not what she truly felt. That night, both of them realized they were looking for the same thing. A space where the sound came from the heart, not duty. The secret meetings became their favorite hours of the day. Charlotte began to smile more, even during formal classes. People noticed her playing sounded warmer than before. Her teacher was pleased, thinking new discipline had shaped her touch. She said nothing to anyone about the real reason. Ethan carried her laughter with him on his nightly shifts, humming their shared melody as he polished the halls. The world around them still called him a janitor, but when he touched those piano keys, he felt something greater than any title. After several weeks, she suggested they write a piece together, something that speaks for both of us, she said as she marked the first blank page. They began to plan, one note at a time, combining the simplicity of his tunes with her trained structure. The music grew into a song that captured the feeling of contrast between their worlds. They called it Glass Hands because they both worked with fragile things. She with ivory keys, he with floors that reflected light like glass. Every night they played another part of the piece until it sounded complete. The melody started quiet and humble, like Ethan himself, then rose with strength and color until it reached a sound that felt like both of them singing together. When they finished, Charlotte sat in silence, her eyes bright. "It is perfect," she whispered. Ethan shook his head but smiled. "It feels real. That is enough." Their friendship deepened. They began talking even outside the music room. She sometimes waited for him in the hallway before he began cleaning duty, pretending to ask about building maintenance so no one would question her. Ethan worried about the risk, but he could not stop seeing her. Then one afternoon, a small group of students saw her hand a folded page to Ethan after class. They whispered to each other and laughed quietly. "The janitor and the princess," one of them said, later behind her back. Charlotte heard about the rumors but ignored them. Yet she knew gossip spread fast. She warned Ethan they needed to be careful. He agreed, though the hurt in his eyes was clear. A few days later, the conservatory director made an announcement about a new performance at the annual gala. He said every student could submit an original composition and that the best would be featured before important guests and sponsors. Charlotte turned to Ethan during their secret meeting that night, holding the paper in her hand. "Maybe our piece should be heard," she said. He looked surprised and scared. "They would never allow that if they knew I was part of it." She smiled at him. "Then they will not know. We will send it with only our initials." Ethan hesitated. "If they find out?" he asked. Charlotte lowered her gaze for a moment. "Then they find out. But I will not let them insult what is real." Her voice was calm but strong. He nodded, knowing she meant it. That night they played Glass Hands again, from start to finish. The music filled the room with warmth. The sound carried everything they were afraid to say out loud. When they stopped, they looked at each other, both silent for a moment that needed no words. The tune had become a promise, even if the world outside might not understand it. Charlotte worked on the final sheet of Glass Hands late into the night. The tune they had made together grew inside her mind like sunlight that refused to fade. At the top of the page she wrote 2 letters, hers and his, without full names. When she looked at the paper she felt proud, but also nervous, because the piece did not belong to her alone. It carried both their stories. The next morning she placed the composition in the submission box with all the others and walked away before she could change her mind. Ethan did not sleep well that night. He kept thinking about what might happen if someone guessed the truth. He did not want trouble for Charlotte, yet a small part of him felt proud that their work might be heard by people who never looked at him before. The melody played in his head through every hallway he cleaned that day. A week passed before the results were announced. The director called everyone to the main hall. Charlotte stood among her classmates while Ethan listened from the far end of the corridor, sweeping quietly though his heart beat faster. The director held a paper in his hand and spoke with excitement. He said that one composition had touched the judges more deeply than any other. He praised its emotion, its balance between sadness and hope. Then he read the title, Glass Hands. Charlotte held her breath. The entire hall applauded. The director said the piece would open the gala performance in front of donors and reporters. That night Charlotte ran to tell Ethan the news. She found him near the supply closet cleaning brushes. He looked up and saw her smile. "We won," she said softly. For a moment neither spoke. Then he laughed, a sound he rarely made. He shook his head, almost in disbelief. It cannot be real. She said it was true, and that their music would play in front of everyone. He wanted to be happy, yet worry shaded his joy. "If they find out it was me, they will throw me out," he said. Charlotte placed a hand over her chest. "They will not find out. This music belongs to something bigger than our names." Over the next days excitement filled the conservatory. Students practiced harder, teachers gave advice, and workers prepared the stage and decorations. The gala was the biggest night of the year. Charlotte spent hours at the piano. Polishing every movement of Glass Hands, Ethan returned to his duties, but helped her after closing, adjusting the piano bench, cleaning the floor, and making sure the room stayed quiet so she could focus. Each night after practice, they would share a moment of calm, both feeling the same fear hiding under their smiles. The day before the gala, rumors began to spread. Someone had looked closely at the handwriting on the composition papers. Others said they had seen the janitor near Charlotte's room late at night. By afternoon, whispers had reached the director. He asked Charlotte to come to his office. She sat in front of him, her hands cold but steady. "Charlotte," he said, "there are strange stories going around about this piece that is to be performed at the gala. You would tell me if anyone else helped you write it, correct?" She looked directly at him. "It is my composition," she replied. He studied her for a long moment, clearly unsure, but let her go. When she left the office, 2 students passed by and laughed quietly. She held her head high, though inside she felt sick. That evening, she went searching for Ethan. He was polishing the main stairs. "They are talking," she said in a low voice. He put down the cloth. "Then it is my fault," he replied. "They will think badly of you if they know." She shook her head. "Will not hide the truth if I am asked again. I cannot let them take this music away from us." The next morning, the director called her back and asked her one more time if she had written the piece alone. She told him the truth. He listened without expression, then thanked her and told her to leave. Within an hour, Ethan was called to the office as well. He came out with a small bag of his things. The conservatory had removed him from his position. When Charlotte heard, she ran down the hall to find him. He stood by the doorway near the service exit, his eyes filled with quiet resignation. "It is over," he said. "You will still have your stage." She shook her head fiercely. "I will not play without you," he tried to smile. "You must. The music belongs to both of us. Make them hear it." Then he turned and left the building, the rain beginning to fall outside. That night the gala lights filled the hall with golden glow. Guests in elegant clothes filled the seats. The director greeted everyone with his practiced smile. Charlotte sat backstage, her fingers cold on her lap. The announcer spoke her name and introduced the piece Glass Hands. She walked to the piano and sat alone under the bright lights. When the applause faded, she looked toward the far door, half expecting to see Ethan's face. The world around her waited. She took a breath and placed her hands on the keys. The first soft notes filled the room like a whisper of memory. Each chord carried pieces of him. The audience listened in stillness as the music grew stronger, carrying the spirit of the one who could not be there. Every sound she made that night became a bridge between their worlds, reaching from the stage to wherever he had gone. Charlotte's fingers trembled slightly as she reached the middle part of the piece. The sound filled the grand hall like a long breath after silence. Every key she pressed recalled Ethan's face, his quiet nod when a melody worked, his smile when their notes finally met. She felt the emotion swell through her chest until her throat tightened. For a second she thought of stopping, but the memory of his words, "Make them hear it," kept her moving.
Oh, great.
The audience sat still. The donors, teachers, and students listened without moving. No one had expected this sound from her. They had known her talent, but never this level of feeling. Each note told a story they could not put into words. It was not polished like competition music, it was full of truth. Then, as she reached the next passage, her hand hesitated. That final part of the piece was supposed to be a duet. She felt the emptiness of the second half, the one Ethan should have played. Air seemed too quiet. Her eyes lifted by instinct toward the far door at the end of the hall, just as a faint noise echoed. The door opened. A man stepped inside in his gray uniform, face partly shadowed by the bright lights. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Ethan walked down the aisle slowly, his shoes leaving soft sounds on the polished floor. The guards moved to stop him, but the director raised his hand for silence. Every eye followed Ethan as he came closer to the stage. Charlotte's heart pounded, but she did not stop playing. When he reached the piano, he looked at her with a calm she had never seen before. She made space beside her on the bench. Without asking for permission, he sat down. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Then his rough, steady hands found the keys and entered the tune where she had paused. The sound that followed was pure and alive. Two worlds met again under the same light, creating something that felt larger than both of them. Ethan's rough, earnest playing shaped the rhythm while Charlotte's smooth touch painted the melody. Together the sound grew until even the last person in the back row leaned forward, spellbound. When the final note ended, the hall fell into deep silence. For a long moment no one clapped or spoke, and the applause began, slow at first, and then rolling like thunder across the room. People rose to their feet. Some wiped their eyes. The director looked unsure whether to be proud or angry. Charlotte and Ethan stood from the bench, their faces glowing with the strange calm that comes after courage. He whispered quietly, "You should not have done that for me." She smiled and replied, "We did it for the music." Reporters wrote about the performance the next day. They called it the highlight of the gala. They said that for a few minutes the conservatory had been reminded that art belongs to everyone, not only to those with fine clothes and old family names. Some critics even described it as a story told in sound, a melody of two lives colliding and finding harmony. The director could see that firing Ethan would make the school look cruel after such praise. He called a meeting with the board and spoke carefully about restoring Ethan's position. By the end of the week, Ethan returned to the building, not as a janitor only, but also as assistant to a new music outreach program. Many students who had once ignored him now greeted him with respect. Charlotte visited him often. They practiced together after classes, this time with open doors. She no longer hid her laughter when he teased her about missing a note. Their friendship grew stronger, simple and steady. People around them saw how naturally they worked together. Some whispered about a closer bond, but neither of them confirmed anything. They only kept playing. Months later, the conservatory announced a small evening concert for charity. Charlotte suggested performing Glass Hands again, and Ethan agreed. The crowd was smaller this time, but filled with warmth. When they began to play, there was no fear of judgment, no hiding. Each sound carried the same truth as before, maybe even stronger because it came from peace rather than struggle. After the concert, a young student approached Ethan shyly and asked, "Can someone like me, without lessons, learn to play too?" He smiled and nodded. "If you have music in your heart, yes, you can always learn." The boy grinned and ran off, inspired. Charlotte watched him and said quietly, "You see, now you are teaching without realizing it." He laughed and said, "Maybe music always teaches. We just follow." The years after that night became stories people told to new students. The night when the janitor walked onto the stage and turned silence into something unforgettable. The night a rich girl found truth beyond her privilege. And every time anyone played Glass Hands, the room seemed to glow with the same light that had joined them. Ethan still cleaned the floors sometimes because he said it kept him grounded. Charlotte still practiced every morning, but her music changed forever. When they played together, the same calm filled the room as on that first night he touched her piano. The sound of their tune drifted out of the windows of Hillcrest Conservatory, carried by the wind across the city, just as bright and honest as the day it was born.